You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. You mentioned Ted Bundy. I think that would be a good one to start with. I know most of the audience is probably vaguely familiar with him and the events surrounding his life, but maybe you could give us just a brief overview of who he was, the killings that he was involved with, and some of the theories on why and what happened with him.
Well, Ted Bundy, a lot of people may not know about him now, but he was big news in the late 70s and 80s because he was a very articulate, well-spoken, good-looking, kind of Republican type character, and very charming and very witty. But if you go and watch any of the footage of him, you'll see he's clearly psychotic. There's something that in his eyes that just is very disturbing. And I was a kid. God, I was probably a year old when he was arrested, but when he had been convicted, and it took him 10 years to execute him, it was big. He was still big news. And he started off, he was born out east. I don't know if it was in Vermont but he was born to a single mother, unwed mother, and she had him in a house for unwed mothers, and she was just going to leave him there and have someone else. She never really identified. She identified a few names, but her father demanded that she go get him back and that they raise him. So she went and got Ted back. He was a baby. She brought him back home, and Ted was raised as if her parents, her father, his grandfather, and his grandmother were his mother, and she was his sister. So he grew up thinking that. Now, Ted Bundy always claimed his family was a good Christian family. They had, nothing wrong with them. But we know now that his grandfather was very violent and abusive. The grandmother had a lot of mental health issues. She was probably being abused. And we know at about 3 years old, it was recorded that Ted was taking knives and arranging them on a bed, pointing at one of his aunts or his aunt in a circle under the bed. He was pointing knives and arranging a bunch of knives at her, and he's 3 years old. So he was exhibiting some of these behaviors really young. And I don't doubt that there was probably something biological there, but that he was probably influenced by some of the really violent behaviors of his grandfather. Now his mother up and moves them. When he's about 4 or 5, she moves to the West Coast. She moves to Washington State. I think she lived Tacoma, Seattle area. And she meets which would be his future stepfather. I can't remember his first name, but obviously his last name is Bundy. And he adopts Ted as his own, and he becomes Ted Bundy. And then they have 4 more kids. And he's a really healthy man. It tends to be a very religious Christian background. They have 4 kids. Those other kids grew up to be quite normal and healthy. But Ted was always off. There was always something about him. And everyone says he was a normal boy. But then when in hindsight, you start realizing he was doing weird things like spying on people, peeping Tom, torturing cats, just really bullying, aggressive, and not much emotion, not much feeling even from the time he was really young. And so Washington is where he actually starts his crimes. And I think it's like 1973. He is 72. He really starts it. But before that, they think the trigger was he was dating this young woman. If her name was Diane, and she had long, dark hair, and she was really attractive. And Ted was really focused on looking like well-to-do from a good background, and he was really quite obsessed with it. And he wanted to marry this girl who was from a good family, and she dated him for a while, and she just didn't feel like he was showing any kind of promise or anything like that. So she broke up with him. And I think it was after that he really started to get into some sort of depravity, and he started dating and was in a relationship with a woman at the time. He dated her for years and lived part-time with her and was almost like a father figure to her daughter. So he was holding a relationship, but at this time women started to go missing in Tacoma. And I don't have a list of the exact victims, but it's probably somewhere like at least 10 women. And he's spotted in different areas. And he's spotted. First, they spot his vehicle, and he'd also gotten his degree in psychology. Remember this. This is actually important. This is really interesting. He was capable enough. I don't know if he had outstanding grades, but he had his degree in psychology at this time because he had gone to the university there. And so women start going missing, and there was this one incident where he was actually identified as saying his name. He was trying to get someone. He was so bold. He would go up and he would just introduce himself right up to people. A lot of times he'd be wearing a cast, or he'd have a crutch. He would present himself as needing help. Can you please come and help me? And some women would be like, no, they got creeped out. And there would be other women who were more naive or just very helpful, and they would go. And this one particular incident, and I forgot the young lady's name, she went with him, but someone heard them exchange a conversation. She introduced herself and he said, "Hi, I'm Ted." So they had a name, and they also had his Volkswagen Bug identified, like a tan Bug. So they had that. And what was interesting is the girlfriend, the regular relationship that he had, she was from Utah. A lot of people don't draw this connection. She had come from Utah over to Washington State. She'd had a daughter and divorced, and she was a single mom, and I guess she just wanted a new life away from, where she lived in Utah, which is actually not far from me as well. And suddenly he announces that he's going to go to Utah. And he's going to become a lawyer. He's going to take the lawyer in the University of Utah. And of course, once he leaves Washington and goes to Utah, all the killings in Washington just magically stop. But of course, now in Utah, young girls start to go missing here. And I think about 8 went missing here. And one of the houses here that I actually went and visited in Bountiful was a focus of sort of some evil place where he might have done something, maybe not. But then he's involved in stuff probably in Iowa. They've traced him to stuff in Colorado. But he makes a mistake in Utah, a really big one. He tries to abduct this girl, and she gets away, and she identifies him. And they take him to court. He had actually even joined the Mormon church. He was so smooth. I mean, he joined the Mormon church here. He had them all convinced. And he's very charming. So they take him to jail, a court. And this guy has been studying to become a lawyer. He's extraordinarily arrogant. If you guys ever watch the court proceedings of him before he got finally convicted, you'll see how arrogant and crazy he is. I think he gets a year to 15 years for kidnapping, because that's all they can get him on. But they're pretty sure. I mean, he's connected. There's a whole bunch of girls that suddenly go missing. But they extradite him over to Colorado because I think it was Aspen. He had abducted a woman there. She was left to go do something from ski lodge, and he got her. And he's really good. He's just luring these people. He's playing the victim. He's using his charm, his manipulation, and he's catching these, unwitting women and young girls. And he's, leading them to their death. And it's not a pretty death. It's long tortures. He's sadomasochistic. He's got some seriously insane rage against women. His preference was for women with long, dark hair parted in the middle, but he does deviate from that once in a while. So they try to get him in Colorado. He escapes jail the first time. They get him pretty quick back into prison. And then he escapes again. And he literally planned this. He literally starved himself, lost 30 pounds, escapes from his jail cell up a duct, whittles his way through. And it was Christmas time. So I guess the guard or whatever it was away with his family. He gets into his room and he's gone. And they didn't figure that out for 15 hours. So he had this massive head start. And he flees to Florida, and in those days, we have to remember that it was way harder to catch a serial killer. There was no DNA.